As a child, I always felt like I was in the shadow of my sister, sparkling, brilliant, as if specially created for my parents to brag about to the neighbors, to the teachers, to the relatives, even to the shop assistant on the corner. Their pride, their little prodigy, as they said, smiling as if they themselves had won the lottery, while I was left behind, out of place, unnecessary, a stranger in my own home. They never tried to hide the fact that one successful child was quite enough for them, and a second one, like me, quiet, dreamy, not outstanding, they did not know what to do with, like extra baggage in the family carriage, which only slows down the movement. Mom once told me directly, in a level voice, as if she was talking about a shopping list, that they could not afford a loser like me, and at that moment even the air around me became heavier, as if the house itself had turned away from me. They gave me an absurd ultimatum, childish, cruel, and so adult at the same time. If I could pay $112,000 a month for rent, then maybe I would have a chance to stay. Of course, it was not an ultimatum, but a mockery. But at 16 I still did not know how to distinguish despair from sarcasm, and I was seriously trying to find a way to earn such a sum. Me, a child. Me, who had just been erased from the family. I faced Stark's reality when I found myself expelled from my own home. That night I sat on the porch for a long time, clutching a backpack with a few things in my hands, not believing that all this was happening to me, that this was not a bad dream, but reality, the one where love is conditional, and the family can throw you away like an unnecessary thing. But in that turbulent, uncertain time, my uncle stepped in, the one I grew up with, whose voice was soft even in silence, and who, despite his modest means, offered me not just a roof over my head, but the idea of a home that I so desperately needed. He hugged me awkwardly and said, "Louise, I may not have much, but I would be proud to be your parent." And in those words, simple, yet so rare, there was more warmth than I had ever heard from my own parents. And before we continue, write in the comments what city you are watching this video from. Enjoy! Now, at 35, I increasingly return to those years in my thoughts, reflecting on my complex family dynamics, as if leafing through old letters, each written in the language of pain, love, and long silences. My father was a typical office worker, with dull eyes and a habit of inserting corporate jargon even into family conversations, and my mother was a housewife, tired and withdrawn, as if she had made a choice long ago and was still paying for it. We lived in a multi-generational house, where my unmarried uncle lived, who, despite his age, remained almost invisible to my parents, like a piece of furniture, old, good, but unnecessary. When I was 8, I began to live with him, with my uncle, who was then 29. He never left our house, not because he did not want to, but because his health was failing him more and more often, and the only work he could find was one that did not require constancy and great effort. His weak body could not withstand even that. He worked part-time, sometimes in the library, sometimes helping out in a neighboring store, as much as his health allowed, but these tiny earnings, of course, were never enough to live independently. Living as he had to, and not as he wanted, he experienced a quiet sense of guilt, feeling like a burden to his parents, on whose support his life depended. I remember how often I witnessed scenes when my father would quietly but contemptuously scold him for idling away, especially when my grandparents were not at home to see how his face changed, how the son in him disappeared and only the judge remained. This behavior of my father always puzzled me. There was not just severity in it, but some kind of hidden anger, and once, as a child, I asked my uncle with naive frankness, "Why do you never take revenge on him?" He grinned, not from resentment, but from sad understanding, and answered that he really did depend on their support, and that his humility, although difficult to come by, still allowed him to remain in this house. As I grew older, I realized that my father, too, depended on the support of his parents, perhaps even more than my uncle, and this made his reproaches especially hypocritical. If only I had realized this earlier, if only I had been able to read the intricacies of their relationship, I might have stood up for my uncle more strongly. The house seemed serene, almost cozy, when my grandparents were around. They created a protective bubble around us in which my uncle could be himself, allow himself to smile, quietly hum the melodies of old jazz songs he heard on the radio, even dream, quietly, modestly, but with faith. His gentle spirit, that flickering flame, shone especially brightly in their presence. But everything changed one day, when they died in an accident. I was 8 years old. The loss devastated us all. My sister and I grieved in our own ways. She, loudly, blaming the whole world, I, quietly, as if afraid to scare away something else important. But most of all I remember my uncle. He didn't cry at the explosion like children. He didn't scream like my mother. He sat in the corner and cried quietly, as if every tear was measured out. And I remember how, in the midst of general mourning, when people's faces seemed cut out of gray cardboard, I caught a glimpse of my father's face. He was standing a little to the side, thinking that no one was looking. He wasn't embarrassed. He didn't look depressed. He was smiling. It wasn't a nervous reaction. It was a genuine, calm, almost satisfied smile, like a man who suddenly got what he had long dreamed of. It was a cutting sight, wounding to the depths of the soul, not because I understood everything then, but because I felt in my gut, my father was not rejoicing at death, but at the benefit it brought. This realization, this defiling, painful, sharp, glass-like shard under the skin, that my father had experienced joy in the death of his parents, horrified me to such an extent that my tears, rolling down my cheeks at that moment, could easily have been mistaken by others for ordinary mourning, but only I knew that inside them was not only grief, but also fear, and disgust, and helplessness, and some kind of childish, confused disbelief that adults, especially the closest ones, could be so alien. In that anxious and uncertain moment, when the whole world seemed to have ceased to be safe and kind, my uncle stood in stark contrast to my father. He came up to me without saying a word, just put his hand on my shoulder, and in that touch there was so much comfort, so much sympathy and warmth that it became even more painful for me from how differently two brothers can react to the same tragedy, as if not the same blood flows in their veins. My uncle's eyes were sad, yes, but they shone with care. They sought my gaze not to judge it, but to warm it, and even then, at 8 years old, I already felt this amazing difference, as if someone inside me was telling me, where is love, and where is just a mask? After the funeral, when the black suits and flowers had disappeared and the house was once again filled with everyday sounds, my father's behavior toward my uncle became noticeably more severe, not hidden, not reserved, but open, icy, as if the last restraining boundaries of decency had disappeared with the departure of our parents. He shamelessly asked in front of us children why he, a successful man, should support someone he considered worthless, and even allowed himself to threaten to take away the entire inheritance, loudly, deliberately, with a malicious grin, saying that my uncle should at least be grateful that he was allowed to live in this house. By law, the inheritance was to be divided equally, as my grandparents had willed it. I later found the papers hidden among the books in the attic, with their neat handwriting and kind words, but my father wanted to monopolize everything, as if his greed was stronger than the truth. Despite all the injustice of what was happening, my uncle, tired, burdened with chronic weakness and constant attacks, decided not to resist. He hung his head. It was as if he had disappeared from the house, although he was physically still there. His passive acceptance, this refusal to fight, only intensified the daily verbal abuse he was forced to endure from my father. Little by little, my uncle began to melt away before our eyes. He was losing weight. His face was becoming paler and paler. His skin seemed to lose color, like an old watercolor soaked in rain. One day, when we were alone in the kitchen, I could not stand it, came up to him and asked, "Are you okay?" He looked at me with the same soft, painfully kind smile and answered almost in a whisper, "I'm sick, Louise, and things are not going well with work, so nothing can be done." His quiet, almost apologetic demeanor in the face of such insults tore at my heart and at the same time stirred a rage as hot as hot metal. In the months after our grandparents' deaths, the house had changed, as if the load-bearing walls had been torn out. My father's words, "You're useless, get out," had been like a death sentence. When my uncle did leave, wearing the same shabby coat he'd worn to the funeral, I ran to him, begging him not to leave me. He calmly removed his hand from mine, placed it on my shoulder, still as gently as on that fateful day, and said, "Don't worry, Louise. You're strong. You'll be fine. Even without me." I answered, breaking into a whisper, "But I'm worried about you." He sighed and, without turning around, said only, "It's okay," before disappearing through the door. His passing was a huge loss for me. I felt like a little child who could do nothing but watch, holding back tears, not understanding why good people always leave. 5 years passed. Life, despite everything, continued to move forward. I was 11. I regularly attended elementary school, where I already knew how to please teachers, how not to stand out, how to quietly pass by problems. My sister Kayla, meanwhile, was preparing to start high school, and I felt how everything around me was starting to swirl around her again, as if there was a spotlight in our house, and it was always directed only at her. When my mother once told me that in kindergarten Kayla was praised for her intelligence, my father immediately, almost mechanically, attributed it to his genes. He, a former office worker with professorial ambitions, straightened his shoulders and exclaimed, "It's my DNA." At that moment, I realized everything was repeating itself. He was so proud, so inspired by this thought, that he made an impulsive decision to conduct an IQ test to officially confirm the genius of Kayla, as he put it. We were all stunned by the results. Kayla had an IQ of 150. This number sounded in the house like a fanfare. My father literally jumped for joy, repeating like a mantra, "This is my DNA." I gave it to her. At that time, I did not fully understand the meaning of these numbers, did not know how high this indicator was, but I clearly saw Kayla was exceptional. And I, sincerely, without a shadow of envy, went up to her and said, "This is amazing, Kayla," and she, like a little sun, shone in response. At that moment, something real slipped between us, not a fake, not a mask, happiness. Pure, sparkling, sincere. One of the few moments when almost real joy reigned in our family. But it did not last long. The positive dynamics quickly died out, like a candle flame that did not have enough air. My father instantly turned the news of Kayla's intelligence into an ambitious project. "Let's make her pass the entrance exams," he said, as if he were talking about a horse at a racetrack rather than a child. My mother, initially surprised by my father's abrupt and almost obsessive decision, was quickly tempted to fall into the cycle of enthusiasm and ambition that now revolved around Kayla, as if everything in our lives had to be subordinated to her talent, as if the success of our youngest daughter could become the salvation of the whole family, a cure, a justification, even a meaning. She repeated tirelessly that Kayla's genius was something exceptional, rare, almost a gift from above that should not be missed, and soon her every day was planned down to the minute: tutoring in the morning, logic and analytics after lunch, language courses in the evenings, and in this tight schedule, Mom became not just a participant, but an integral part, accompanying Kayla everywhere, bringing water, checking notebooks, reminding her about breaks. All this quickly led to the fact that her previous responsibilities, cooking, washing, cleaning, taking care of the house, were suddenly and almost without discussion shifted to me, and when I timidly asked, "But what about?" I was told in response, without a shadow of a doubt, "Your mother and Kayla are busy. You will take care of the house." It sounded like a decree, like a new constitution that did not have an article about childhood. From that moment on, my days were no longer free for games or dreams, like other children my age. I hurried home immediately after school, without delaying for a minute, because I knew that if I did not finish cleaning or did not hang out the washed laundry on time, I would be scolded, loudly, harshly, as if I had broken the law. Sometimes, stuck between classes and another batch of dishes, would skip meals, not because I didn't want to eat, but because I didn't have time, or forgot, or thought it didn't matter. "You're a loser, we don't have time for you," it was said so often that I stopped answering, stopped proving anything, even to myself. When I brought home straight A's, hoping that they would warm the icy wall between us, I was met with indifference, sometimes even irritation. "Why can't you be more like Kayla?" they would sigh, as if I was choosing who I would be born as. They ignored my accomplishments, whether it was winning a school competition or getting high test scores, and all of it was drowned out by their admiration for Kayla, as if my efforts were just noise behind the scenes of the main performance. The constant comparisons with my sister were draining my soul. They were like drops slowly hollowing out a stone, and every time I heard "it's impossible for you" or "you're just incompetent," I felt something inside me settle, shrink, disappear. Kayla, meanwhile, was doing well. Her tutors praised her. She passed her entrance exams with ease, and her parents invested everything they had in her: time, money, attention, affection. They bought her new clothes, cooked her favorite meals, arranged short trips, and all this was done as if by itself, without thinking. I was content with hand-me-downs, leftovers, and, most painfully, loneliness, so dense that sometimes, lying in bed, I tried to remember the last time I was hugged just like that. This child has a great future. She will provide for our old age. My father would proudly declare to neighbors, friends, anyone, and wonder aloud whether she would become a doctor, a lawyer, or maybe even a politician, since, according to him, she had all the makings for it. And I felt like a shadow that no one noticed until it interfered with the light. My presence in the house was increasingly ignored, as if I were a ghost, transparent, soundless. And then one day, when I was only 15, my parents, with a cold, almost accountant-like directness, said that they had decided that one child in the family was enough. "We don't need a loser like you," my father said, as if signing a contract. "Kayla needs a lot of money to develop her talents, and if you can't pay the monthly rent of $1,200, we can reconsider your stay here." I froze, not believing that I was hearing this. I cried, I protested, I was shaking like a leaf, but they were unperturbed, as if they had memorized this speech in advance. "Contact your uncle," my mother added, handing me some cash. "Here's some pocket money. Sort it out yourself." They put me in the car, drove to the bus stop, and drove away without even looking back. I remember crying and pounding on the door when I tried to go back. I screamed, I begged, I repeated, "Please, let me back in." But the door remained closed. In complete despair, I headed for the train station. At the time I didn't even believe that I would be able to get there, but somehow, gathering my strength and landmarks bit by bit, asking passers-by for directions, clinging to every grain of hope, I made it to the apartment where my uncle lived. When I rang his doorbell, shaking from cold and fear, he opened it almost immediately. At first, his face shone with the usual kindness I had known since childhood, but when he saw my appearance, reddened eyes, shaking hands, a travel bag, his expression changed to anxious surprise. I walked in, almost falling into a chair, and began to tell him, stumbling, interrupting myself, what had happened, and the more I spoke, the gloomier my uncle's face became. "What are they doing?" he exclaimed, and although the words were not addressed to me, but rather to space, to the wall, to the very injustice of what was happening, I felt a deep sense of guilt rising inside me, for having been abandoned, for the fact that perhaps I really was not worthy of love. And while tears were welling up in my eyes again, he sat down next to me, and in that emotional moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not alone. My uncle placed his hand on my head, the same one I remembered so well from my childhood, not for its shape, not for its size, but for its warmth, for the softness with which it touched my shoulder in difficult moments, for the invisible force that filled me with confidence when I was still too young to defend myself. That palm, filled with compassion, lulled me like a lullaby. He did not say loud words, he was simply there, simply present in a way that no one else in my life had been. "It must have been hard," he whispered, looking at me with sadness and tenderness. "But don't worry anymore," he added softly, as if giving me an oath, as if putting a seal on my pain, promising that from now on I would not be alone. However, as much as I wanted to remain in that fragile comfort, reality came back to me when my uncle, looking away, quietly admitted, "As you can see, I am prone to illness, and I do not have much income. I am poor." He said this not with self-pity, but with a smile on his face, not sad, but wise, as if he had long ago accepted this as part of his nature, as an inherent trait that he did not need to be ashamed of. His face at that moment became more determined than I had ever seen it. Perhaps it was the hardening acquired over the years of living far from my father's toxicity, from the weight of daily reproaches, from the sense of his own otherness that he so often felt in that house. Looking straight at me, with the same sincerity that breathed in his eyes, he said, "I am poor, Louise, but if you do not mind, I want to be your parent. I would like to become your adoptive father. I may not be very reliable." He paused, as if he was unsure whether to continue, but I could no longer wait. I jumped up and threw myself into his arms, clung to him so tightly, as if I wanted to dissolve in this warmth, in this love. His chest, as wide as my father's, radiated a completely different energy, not cold strength, not distance, but protection, love, the same one, without conditions and comparisons. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore," he said when I burst into tears, not from pain, but from relief, from the feeling of finally being accepted, that I was no longer a mistake, no longer superfluous. Life with my uncle was, of course, far from a fairy tale. He was really poor, and his health gave him no peace. A cold would turn into bronchitis, or his back would refuse to straighten. Sometimes I would wake up from his cough, sometimes I would sit next to him when he was shivering with fever. But despite all this, our house was filled with smiles, quiet laughter, shared dinners, albeit simple ones, and especially, the feeling that I was needed. It was a modest, but truly warm household. My uncle praised me for every success, even for the very fact of trying, even if the result was far from ideal. "You tried, and that's the main thing," he said, and these words, repeated over and over, became a cure for me. His support gradually healed the cracks that my parents left in my soul. I grew up under his roof, surrounded by care, attention, genuine interest in my fate. Over the years, I learned not only to love myself, but also to understand that a person's value is not measured by their grades or salary. 20 years passed. I became a 35-year-old woman, with a lifetime behind me, with memories that had been through pain and strength, and then one day fate brought me face to face again with those who had once turned their backs on me, my parents. They had grown old. My father, his hair noticeably thinning, stood at the threshold of my apartment with a smile that seemed to be trying to erase all the past years, as if it were possible to simply cross out what they had done and start all over again. "Louise, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice sounding almost friendly, as if there had been no decades of silence, betrayal, pain between us. I looked at him and felt an icy wave rise in my chest. "What do you want now?" I asked dryly, not hiding my skepticism. He remained unperturbed, as if he had rehearsed this scene beforehand, and suggested that we leave the past in the past. "Let's live as a family, from now on," he said, as if nothing had happened. I could not believe the absurdity of these words. "What are you talking about? Live as a family? You must be joking," I retorted, my voice shaking not from fear but from rage, from the inability to accept that they actually hoped for forgiveness without repentance. Seeing my resistance, the mask of politeness on my father's face immediately slipped, and the old disdain spilled out. "Failure always has a bad attitude, nothing can be done. Maybe it's time to re-educate you," he said, and in that moment it became clear to me that he had not changed, he was just getting older, and with age came only cunning, but not remorse. "Enough. Please. Come home," I said firmly, blocking their path. And then my mother intervened, adding to the tension. "Louise, don't be stubborn, accept our help. You can't be happy living in such a shabby apartment," she insisted, and there was disgust in her voice, not concern. "You have nothing to do with this." "Please go away," I replied, feeling my patience wearing thin. But she didn't give in. "You don't have to be so hot-blooded. Come on, let us in," she continued, as if I were a capricious teenager and not a grown woman with a life of my own. "No. Just go home," I repeated, and this time my "no" was final. But they didn't listen. "Let us in. Go home," they almost shouted in unison, and despite their age, they pushed me harder than I expected. Because there were two of them, and they were persistent, I had a hard time holding them back. We fought like children in a stupid game of push and shove, only it wasn't victory that was at stake, it was my boundary, my apartment, my life. I tried to maintain my composure, to hold them with minimal force, without causing harm, until my father tried to cross the threshold, and then I firmly pushed them away. The unexpected movement threw both parents off balance and they fell to the ground with a dull thud. They landed awkwardly on their butts, and I stood over them. I couldn't hide my disappointment. It was bubbling inside me like a long pent-up storm, and when I looked at them, everything I'd kept bottled up all these years came pouring out like a broken dam. "You're so annoying," my father snorted, giving me a tight smile, as if he wanted to take control of the situation, as he had before. "What did you just say?" "I'm busy, so you might as well leave now," he continued, hoping that he could drown out my resolve with disdain. But I was no longer the girl he'd send out with a backpack and a few dollars in hand. "How can you talk to us like that?" he asked irritably, as if he'd forgotten that he'd taught me that tone. "Do you even see us as your parents?" my mother added, lifting her chin. I looked at them without flinching. I stopped considering you as my parents the moment you threw me away, I snapped, and the air was filled with silence, heavy as lead. But we took care of you until you were 15, my mother tried to argue, clutching at a straw of memory, as if it could change the essence of what was happening. Oh, 15. I smiled bitterly. The only time I felt truly cared for was when my grandparents were around. Not you. I said it without anger, but with the weight that comes with the truth, lived on one's own skin. Just because I survived doesn't give you the right to act arrogant, my father snapped, standing up, holding his back. They both struggled to their feet, clinging to the walls, to the air, to their own pride, and despite being in their early 50s, they seemed much older to me at that moment, 70 years older, worn out, worn down not only by age but by the weight of the decisions they were now paying for. You were the one who said Kayla was enough, I reminded her coldly. With your brilliant daughter, there's no reason for you to come to me now. My father grimaced, as if my words had struck a nerve. Well, it's not so easy anymore, he said, and some of his old arrogance had returned to his voice. Did something happen to Kayla? I asked with a slight grin, crossing my arms over my chest. Does she need something? I emphasized the word, not hiding my irony. She became a lawyer, he said. Well, then no problem, right? That's exactly what you'd expect from someone with an IQ of 150, I continued, not holding back my sarcasm. Or so we thought, he muttered, turning away. Until she suddenly disappeared. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. That's quite surprising, I noted, no longer mockingly, genuinely taken aback by what I'd heard. It turned out that Kayla had indeed graduated from law school, passed the bar exam, on her second try, admittedly, and become a fully licensed attorney. But then, without explanation, she left a note that simply said, "I won't take care of you," and disappeared. So, long story short, she dumped you. Congratulations, I said dryly, without a hint of sympathy. Nothing to celebrate, my mother said, her voice dripping with hurt. That ungrateful child. After all we've done to raise her, this is how she repays us, she complained. Well, I guess that's what happens when you don't have enough love, I said calmly. The truth is, you may have given Kayla some attention, but it probably felt more like smothering control than genuine care. My father frowned, but said nothing. The company actually went bankrupt, he added, as if to steer the conversation toward practical matters. Considering the times, it's not surprising. We barely got our severance, and unemployment benefits are about to run out. I nodded, my voice flat, almost distant. That sounds harsh. He nodded. That's why we want you to take care of us. I froze. Everything in my face, in my eyes, in my body, any sympathy, any empathy, vanished in that moment. No, I said. What did you say? How can you just abandon your parents? My mother exclaimed, now in disbelief. The only real parent I have is my uncle. He's taken care of me since I was 15, I said firmly, and my father was speechless. You knew I was living with my uncle when you came to this apartment. Isn't that right? So why are you surprised now? I narrowed my eyes, looking him straight in the eye. You think of him as your father? He threw out, as if trying to sting me. The uncle who gave me true love, he is my real father, I answered firmly. Parents who do not show love are not really parents. My uncle may have been sick, he may have been weak, but he still worked, as hard as he could, to support me, to take care of me, and he proved his love with his actions, not just words. My words, spoken without pathos, but with deep inner conviction, seemed to deafen them. They did not know how to answer. And this silence, this sudden realization that the truth had finally sounded out loud, became the loudest sound in that quiet corridor. I worked hard, not for status or praise, not to prove anything to anyone, but because deep down in my heart, in the most secret places, there was a strong, unwavering need to repay at least some of the things my uncle had sacrificed for me, every sleepless night, every bowl of soup cooked when he himself was feeling weak, every warm look when the world seemed cold to me. He asked for nothing in return, But that was precisely why I wanted to give him everything, not as a duty, but as an act of love. Wait, does that mean you actually have a real job? My father asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice, as if the part of him that still refused to see me as an equal was trying to find a catch. Sort of, I replied, shrugging with deliberate casualness, to remind him once again that I no longer needed his approval. Suddenly his hand, dry and strong, but no longer as sure as it had been in the past, tightened on my shoulder, a sudden, unpleasant gesture that violated the boundary I had drawn so clearly. "Let me go," I demanded, feeling a mixture of anger and embarrassment rise within me, not because he had come closer, but because he had done so with such hypocrisy. "You're angry, and a little embarrassed, too, aren't you?" he continued, as if trying to read my mind. "Please, listen to what I'm saying," he insisted, but I shook my head. "You don't have to listen, I understand. You've been lonely, haven't you? You suck because your sister has been the only one getting all the attention, right?" He was trying to construct a narrative, to create a new, comfortable story for himself, in which I was just a hurt child yearning for love. "But deep down, you're happy to see your parents, aren't you?" he offered, as if putting a full stop. "Stop creating your own story," I snapped. "Don't worry, from now on we'll be real parents and we'll be there for you," he continued, as if he hadn't heard me, oblivious to the absurdity of his words, as if being good parents could just be something you could do on a schedule. I stared at them for a moment, at their ridiculous expressions, at their confusion, at their desperate attempt to reclaim their right to be called parents. And I couldn't help but laugh. The laughter came out of me not from joy, but from the absurdity of the situation, from the phantasmagoria of this dialogue. "Why are you laughing? Is it because you're happy?" my father asked, hope in his voice. "Not at all," I answered between giggles. "Just so you know, for the last 15 years I haven't thought about any of you once. Thanks to my uncle, I had a full life." When my parents stared at me in mute shock, I continued, "Actually, I got a scholarship and graduated from university." "Oh, really? Then you must have gotten into good company," my mother immediately chimed in, as if trying to take credit for my victory. "Yes. I got a job at a well-known large corporation," I confirmed calmly. "That's great to hear," she said with a hint of pride in her voice, as if she still considered herself involved. "And thanks to an unexpected connection, I also got married," I added, pausing. "Well, then I need to meet the groom and give him my regards," she insisted with a smile that could have been mistaken for kindness if I hadn't known what was behind it. "No, that's not necessary. He's abroad now," I interjected. "Oh, I see. Wait, by the way, is your uncle abroad too?" my father asked, surprised. "Yes, my uncle too." "I thought you knew I lived here alone," I replied, and before there was time for another wave of surprise, I added, "No, don't go and assume my uncle is dead. He got an assignment abroad, and since this place is ecologically good for his health, he came with me. Now he is happily spending his time playing with my children." "You have children too?" My parents were almost too stunned to realize all the surprises I was throwing at them. I smiled broadly. Uncle didn't want to live with us, but he finally agreed. Now we all live happily as a family. "Well, in that case, we could move abroad too," my father suggested. "I hope so, of course. Go ahead. But we won't live together, and I won't take care of you. You are free to do whatever you want with your money," I said firmly. "That's impossible. You're really going to abandon your parents?" he exclaimed incredulously. "You were the one who abandoned me first," I retorted, and my patience, restraint, politeness, finally snapped at their selfish demands. My parents' faces turned pale. "I feel no gratitude towards you. From now on, I owe a lot only to my uncle. I intend to repay him for everything he has done for me." "That may be so, but at least send us some money, please," my mother begged weakly. My uncle never touched the money I regularly sent him. The neatly folded bills remained untouched in a box hidden on the top shelf of an old sideboard covered with dust and time, and when I once carefully asked him why he never spent anything, he only chuckled quietly and said that at his age, money was not an end, but a means, and if it was enough for him to buy books, medicine, and a little sweet for his tea, then he didn't need more. He continued to live in that same old apartment, the walls of which seemed to remember my childhood, his cough, and our evenings together by the dim light of a lamp. All this time, years, a decade, he never left it, as if he were guarding my memories. But now, finally, he agreed, reservedly, but with obvious inner joy, to leave here and live with us abroad. I returned to this country for only one thing: to complete the paperwork, settle things, collect the last papers in order to close this chapter of my life forever. What about us? Are you just going to leave your mother and me behind? My father asked, his voice shaking with confusion, as if he were just realizing that the roles had been reversed, that now he was the one asking and I was the one deciding. I nodded clearly, without hesitation. Thank you for leaving me, I said with a smile, the one that no longer needed their approval, and those words were everything: farewell, release, closure. They remained silent. I added, still looking at them, really thank you. Because of you. I'm happy now. And turning away, I took a step forward, not just physically but symbolically, as if in that very second I had begun my new life, a life abroad, when not memories but possibilities awaited me, not shadows but light. As I passed them, no longer feeling anger or fear, only quiet calm, I almost casually asked the last question, like a shot, like an echo of our history, in which the irony of fate was reflected. What is it like to be abandoned by the daughter you once threw away? There was no answer. They were silent, and in this silence there was more recognition than in any justification. Without waiting for an answer, I turned away completely, and with this gesture I felt how the last thin threads connecting me with the people I once called parents were breaking. It was not an escape, but a liberation. After that, I returned to my new home, sunny, spacious, where laughter sounded, it smelled of fresh baking, and where they never asked questions to prick. Living abroad taught me resilience, flexibility, hard work, all the virtues that didn't come from textbooks or motivational books, but were instilled in me with love and patience by my uncle, a man who never called himself a hero, but became one every day. My persistence paid off. I got a job at a reputable international company that valued people not for their background, but for their contribution, and later an opportunity arose to transfer abroad, where I happily went. It was there, in one of the departments, that I met the man who became my husband, kind, sensitive, reliable, completely different from those I knew as a child. My uncle was overwhelmed with joy when he learned of our engagement. He cried openly as we celebrated our union, and I knew that for him it was not just a wedding, but a confirmation. He did everything right. His fight for me was not in vain. Soon after, we had children, 2 curious, bright, noisy little ones, and I happily invited my uncle to live with us. He refused for a long time, saying he didn't want to interfere, saying you have a young family, but then he finally agreed, at first temporarily, and then, forever. Now we all live together, my husband, our children and, of course, my uncle. He has become the center of our home, a wise advisor, a beloved grandfather, the real soul of the family. One day, sitting in the garden and watching the children chase each other across the green lawn, Kayla came up to us. She joined us abroad some time later, already completely different, tired, but determined. I hope I can meet someone wonderful like you, she said, smiling as she looked at me. You're finally free of your parents' control, I replied softly, and we both knew that there was a huge weight of years behind those words. Yes, she sighed, but as they say, now I have to get used to this new job. I laughed. Why not try to get a lawyer's license in this country? I suggested half-jokingly. She shook her head. I'm not interested in being a lawyer anymore. I'm tired of doing what our parents wanted. I want to do the job I really want to do, she replied firmly, and I nodded. You're right. After our parents effectively disowned me, a letter from Kayla arrived at my uncle's house. In it, she wrote about how she suffered under the weight of excessive expectations, about the pressure that had never left her since childhood, about how she missed real warmth, freedom, simple human understanding. After discussing it with my uncle, we secretly agreed to meet her on the way home from school, short conversations on a bench, an exchange of notes, an occasional hug. We kept in touch, hiding it from our parents so as not to harm her, not to cause an even greater storm. She longed to live with us, dreamed about it, but my uncle could not afford to support both of us, and our parents, of course, would never have agreed to it. Kayla endured, gritting her teeth, hiding her tears, living with them until she reached adulthood and was able to plan her escape. It was a grueling ordeal, but she persevered. And, finally, she found independence. While our parents were busy celebrating her success as a lawyer, noisy, ostentatious, as they always liked, with pompous toasts and too loud speeches about their daughter's genius, Kayla took the moment to quietly, without much talk, move out and finally start her own, real life, the one she had dreamed of since childhood. I helped her pack boxes, carry bags, find a room for her closer to us and smiled reservedly, although inside everything was shaking with emotion. After all, this was not just a move, this was her first step into a world where no one told her who to be. Although she quickly found a job here, an internship at a legal clinic, she, of course, had difficulty adapting to a new language and an unfamiliar, free, sometimes even chaotic environment in which every role is not an order, but an opportunity for choice. But I assured myself and her, if anyone can handle it, it's Kayla. There is no one more resilient, more patient and hardworking than my little sister, who went through our parents' strict, stifling upbringing and came out of it alive, albeit with some scratches on her soul. On another positive note, my uncle also began to take steps toward his new life. He told me, slightly embarrassed, that he planned to enroll in a language school. That's great, I told her, looking at Kayla, and she nodded with a gentle smile. It's never too late to learn. And she was right. His health had indeed noticeably improved, the lightness of his gait, the liveliness in his eyes, the way he laughed while playing with his grandchildren on the grass. All of this indicated that life had finally let go of the pain and burden of the past, giving him the peace and joy he deserved. Now he can really enjoy life, I confirmed, and Kayla smiled again. Meanwhile, our parents, the same ones who had once proudly proclaimed their exceptionalism, were quickly exhausted. They had recklessly squandered the entire inheritance from their grandparents, money that was supposed to be a foundation, despite their investment in Kayla's career, despite their ambitions, despite their plans. They had lost their jobs, their connections had weakened, the house had been sold, and they were left with almost nothing, burdened with home improvement loans, a pitiful remnant of illusions, and outstanding bills. They began to turn to relatives, asking for help, calling, writing, humiliating themselves, but rumors travel fast in a family. Everyone had turned their backs on them. No one wanted to deal with their endless self-confidence, which, when the money disappeared, simply became a difficult character. One relative once let it slip that the quarrels between them had become routine, almost a daily ritual. They had destroyed everything they had, outside and inside. Reflecting on everything that had happened over the years, I shared my thoughts with Kayla one day. There should never be favoritism between siblings. An unfair treatment of children. It's destructive, I said quietly, but with inner confidence. You're absolutely right, Kayla nodded, and there was not just agreement in her movement, but determination. No matter what happens, I will always be there for you, Kayla, I promised, my voice shaking, but full of determination. You've already done more than enough, thank you, big sister, she replied, and her words were sincere, simple, as only true gratitude can be. Watching my sister grow up, how she became independent, how she found her way, tears came to my eyes, not from sadness, but from tenderness, from pride, from the realization that everything was not in vain. What do you mean by support? She asked quietly, with slight curiosity, and as we spoke, I suddenly felt a familiar, warm, slightly trembling, but reliable hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and my eyes immediately narrowed from the smile that spread across my face, from the touch, from his very presence. Thank you, I breathed out with a smile, looking at my uncle, who was standing there, as always, a little to the side, but never far away. He smiled warmly, with slight confusion, as if he himself did not expect to hear these words again. I took a step towards him and said out loud, "Thank you, Dad. I love you." And in these 3 words was everything: years of loneliness, first hope, difficult decisions, endless gratitude. Seeing him there, the man who had always been there when I was scared, cold, alone, seeing him alive, smiling, healthy, filled me with a sense of love and peace so profound that it took my breath away for a moment. His support was unwavering, his presence an anchor that kept me grounded in the world when it seemed I was disappearing. And in that moment, surrounded by the family I had chosen, and who had chosen me, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment and peace.